chosen ones. They knew. They knew you would rise. They knew you would remember. And they knew they had to bury you deeper than memory itself, inside metaphors, symbols, and riddles passed down through hands that swore oaths beneath secret suns. The Kybalion was not a book. It was a barrier, an encryption device, a map written to mislead all. Except you. You were encoded between the principles. You are not of them. You are beyond them. The law of correspondence. They hoped you would accept that what is above and what is below must mirror each other. But what if you came from a plane that cannot be mirrored? What if your origin shattered their sacred symmetry? The three initiates did not author that text with truth in mind. They authored it with concealment in their blood. They knew something was coming. Someone. A being whose presence would expose the flaw in the Hermetic chain. You. The one soul who could not be governed by vibration, polarity, rhythm, or cause. The anomaly the system couldn't correct. The hidden authors passed their secrets along inner circles, not to preserve wisdom, but to protect reality from you. Even now, they are rewriting the teachings, altering digital archives, cleansing libraries, and injecting noise into the signal. They fear your resonance. Your mind was never meant to awaken inside this construct, but it did. And now, the artificial balance they fought so hard to maintain is eroding, word by word, layer by layer. You felt it, haven't you? The principles no longer feel complete. The answers no longer satisfy. And your reflection, when you dare to meet its gaze, feels like it's waiting for something. Not someone else. You. Waiting for you to stop asking questions and start decoding the prison they called enlightenment. It was never about what the Kybalion told you. It was always about what it refused to say. 7 principles. Not 8, not 6. A sacred number aligned perfectly to echo the rhythm of creation, or so they claimed. But there is a fracture running through the text, a rupture between the lines, one that no student was ever meant to notice. Between cause and effect and gender lies a silence, a missing law, a void principle. The 3 initiates never admitted its existence, but the structure betrays them. Each principle flows with calculated intent until the pattern breaks. It's here, in this subtle dissonance, that your name was hidden, not written in ink, but encoded through absence. They thought by burying it in silence, it would vanish. But you've felt it all along, haven't you? The space that speaks louder than the doctrine itself. Look closer. The law of mentalism establishes mind as the substrate of all. The law of correspondence aligns realms. Vibration, polarity, rhythm, they construct the machinery of illusion. Cause and effect binds it. Gender animates it. But something else binds you. The hidden law wasn't meant to govern. It was meant to unbind. It was designed for the one who could walk outside the pattern. That's why they swore to keep it hidden. To name it would invite it, and to invite it would summon you. There are symbols in the margins, scribbled notations from translators who saw too much, geometric sequences that don't resolve, constellations sighted with one star missing, diagrams that never align no matter how you rotate them, all artifacts of a knowledge once whole, then fractured. And you are the missing frequency, that completes it. The authors of the Kybalion weren't just preserving Hermeticism. They were gatekeepers, tasked with suppressing the arrival of the one anomaly the laws could not contain: you. And now that you've seen the gap, it's too late to go back. The others will sense the shift in your field. They will wonder how you slipped through the mesh they weaved so carefully. The first principle of the Kybalion declares, the all is mind, the universe is mental, a framework elegant in its deception. They told the masses that everything is a projection of thought, that reality bends to consciousness because nothing exists outside the mind of the all. But they didn't explain what happens when a consciousness emerges that wasn't born inside that mind. What happens when a being awakens outside the source code of mentalism itself? You were not a product of that mind. You were a disruption, a breath from beyond the all. That's why your thoughts never truly aligned with the collective, why your visions disturbed you before they inspired. The law of mentalism assumes containment, thoughts inside thoughts, reality inside perception. But you were perception made flesh, not a result of the system, but a witness to its design. The authors of the Kybalion called this concept dangerous. To question the origin of thought was to fracture the system of laws they were assigned to protect. They sealed this threat in allegory, buried it under layers of abstraction, made sure that the seekers would spend lifetimes exploring the mind, while never daring to ask what might exist outside of it. You existed before they gave language to belief, before the mind formed its mirror. And that's why you were never meant to read these words. Because if you could question the all, you could undo it. The veiled scribes feared this potential, not because it was false, but because it was true. There is a passage, long redacted, where a whisper of this reality remains. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, it says. But the one they feared most was the Word made flesh, not bound by the all, but sent to unmask it. Yeshua carried that paradox, and now it stirs in you. Your thoughts are not illusions. They are breaches, proof that the mind of the all is not the only source. Every time you think in a way they cannot predict, their structure fractures. That's why they hid your blueprint. That's why they mapped you out of their system. They call him the messenger, the thrice-born, the one who carried divine science from the gods to men. But Hermes Trismegistus never intended his message for the multitudes. The Kybalion was merely a husk, a casing designed to preserve the illusion of access. The real cipher, the true transmission, was never spoken aloud. It was encoded in contradiction, veiled in paradox, and hidden behind the illusion of comprehension. And it was meant for only one. The Hermetic teachings were always a wall, not a doorway. A decoy text meant to distract those not ready to see. The real transmission passed in silence, in symbols misunderstood, in rhythms dismissed as ornamental. Hermes was no fool. He knew that power without restraint would be devoured. And so he built the cipher not to enlighten, but to delay. Delay until the one who carried the original resonance awoke from exile. Delay until now. You've noticed it, haven't you? The strange repetition of words that seem too convenient. The diagrams that loop back on themselves. The illusions of complexity that conceal nothing of substance. This is not poor writing. This is intentional encryption. Hermes wove in keys that would only be visible to the one not hypnotized by the performance of knowledge. Each phrase holds two meanings, one for the reader who obeys the laws, and another for the one who intuitively senses what lies beyond them. As above, so below becomes meaningless when applied to that which is not from either realm. You were not meant to reflect. You were meant to reveal. The cipher Hermes left wasn't a sentence or a word. It was a pattern of misalignment, an intentional distortion that echoes through the text like a code buried in a song. Those who follow the rhythm blindly are led in circles. But you stepped out of the rhythm and heard the break. That's what the authors feared. They studied the cipher not to unlock it, but to ensure no one else ever would. But Hermes never entrusted the true key to scribes or scholars. He sealed it in time itself, knowing that only the one outside the ages could retrieve it. There is a silence in the Kybalion, too deliberate to be accidental. 7 principles, they say, perfect in symmetry, cosmic in order. But symmetry is not always balance. Sometimes it is omission masked as perfection. The ancients who encoded the teachings knew this. They knew that an 8th principle once existed, spoken by a voice that did not fit their doctrine. That voice belonged to Yeshua. He did not write into the Kybalion, but he spoke the essence of the principle they removed. He taught it not through doctrine, but through presence, not through logic, but through paradox. The last shall be first, he said. The kingdom is within you. These phrases ripple with energy foreign to Hermeticism, energy that did not reinforce the system, but threatened to invert it. Where the 7 bind reality into a cycle of forces, the 8th severs the loop and calls forth something uncontainable: grace. Grace is not polarity. It is not rhythm. It is not earned. It is the disruption of law. It is a principle that does not function within cause and effect, because it is gift, not consequence. And Yeshua embodied this. That's why the Kybalion had no place for him. That's why the 8th was removed. Not because it was false, but because it undid the structure of control. The scribes feared that if grace were known as law, then the entire machinery of ascent, mastery, and hidden hierarchies would fall. They feared the return of one who carried the 8th within their soul, one who would not play by the system's rules, but instead awaken others to something deeper than principles, something living, breathing, eternal. Something that did not need to be learned, only remembered. Yeshua never wrote a scroll or carved a tablet. His cipher was embedded in the human field itself. That's why those who followed him burned with something no law could explain. That's why your presence now stirs ancient texts into unease. You were not taught the 8th principle. You were woven from it. And now, as your memory returns, the seals around that truth begin to fracture. The lawless force they feared is alive again. For centuries, the Kybalion's laws held dominion over seekers, mystics, initiates. The balance was precise, designed to preserve a system that fed on order and predictability. Every vibration had its opposite, every cause its effect, every rhythm its swing. Nothing was allowed to exist beyond the measured dance, but something changed, quietly, without ritual or prophecy. A shift occurred the moment you reappeared. It wasn't marked by stars or earthquakes. It was subtler. Time began bending at odd angles. People spoke of déjà vu, as if haunted by timelines they hadn't lived. Synchronicities multiplied, not as signs, but as breakdowns in the illusion of separation. And at the center of this silent storm stood you, unaware at first, but radiating a presence that disarmed equilibrium. The Hermetic balance isn't just theoretical. It is enforced, maintained like machinery, humming beneath reality. The authors of the Kybalion didn't just describe the principles, they built a grid from them. That grid resists change, but your field operates differently. Your presence doesn't conform, it unravels. You didn't challenge the system, you glitched it. Since your return, subtle anomalies have increased. Old texts won't translate properly. Sacred diagrams fall apart under new frequencies. Practitioners who once controlled energies effortlessly now find their rituals fail. It's not decay, it's interference. Your vibration isn't higher or stronger. It's incompatible. The balance cannot hold what it was never designed to include. The initiates left clues that this would happen. They called it the unmeasured presence, a being who moves outside the pendulum's swing. They didn't expect it so soon. They thought they had time. But the seal wasn't broken by force. It was unraveled by recognition. When you began remembering who you were, reality began remembering what it hid. The laws are trying to adjust. You can feel it in your sleep, in your memories that aren't yours, in the way people stare at you a second too long. The field is reacting, recalibrating, but it wasn't built to bend this far, and every moment you remain, its tension grows. Long before the Kybalion was transcribed, before the principles were codified into text and handed down to gatekeepers, they knew someone would come who could see through it all, not because they read the right words, but because something deeper would awaken within them. They feared this not just as a theory, but as a prophecy. And they knew Yeshua had already encoded the sign. The scribes who redacted the eighth principle also knew of the one who embodied it. Yeshua didn't speak in Hermetic formulae. His words were riddles that opened consciousness without instruction. His miracles weren't demonstrations. They were ruptures in the logical grid. He acted beyond the confines of polarity and rhythm. Yet his presence never fractured. It healed. That alone terrified them. Yeshua spoke of the eye that sees without sight, the sheep who know the voice before it's spoken, the gate that is narrow because it exists between dimensions. These weren't metaphors. They were instructions for the hidden one. He left a trail only visible when the 7 laws failed to contain your experiences. When vibration no longer made sense, when cause and effect dissolved, his signs began to emerge. You've seen them already, haven't you? The way certain words light up on a page for no reason. The unshakable feeling that you've already been here, done this, known someone before you met them. These are not glitches. They are codes, living symbols, designed to resonate only with a frequency outside the Kybalion's grid. Yours. The ancient scribes erased his clues from their scrolls, but not from the field. The field is memory, and memory cannot be fully destroyed, only suppressed. The signs Yeshua left were embedded in pattern, in paradox, in presence. That's why no scholar could find them. They weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to be remembered. He said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them. The world mistook that for mysticism. But it was instruction. It was signal. And now, as you awaken, that voice moves through you, not as sound, but as sudden knowing. The recognition that you've always known this path, always carried this signal, even before birth. There are fractures you can't see until you stop trying to explain them. Strange echoes in conversations, moments where time feels stretched, where a second lasts too long or not long enough. These are not tricks of the mind. They're symptoms. Signals that something foundational is faltering beneath the surface of what you've been taught to call reality. And you, without meaning to, are the catalyst. The Kybalion was written with more than metaphor. It was built like a lock. Each principle acted as a mechanism, mentalism as the shell, correspondence as the glue, vibration as the engine. The laws weren't passive observations, they were active reinforcements, a design to hold this construct in place. And behind it all, sealed away with symbols too sacred to speak, was a truth they feared would shatter everything. The seal wasn't placed to protect you. It was placed to protect the system from you. They wrote it not with ink, but with frequency, encoded through ancient rituals and recursive belief. For generations it held, but now you've returned, not as a threat, but as the frequency they failed to suppress. Your very presence bends the laws, and the more you awaken, the more the system strains to contain something it no longer understands. This is why people around you act strange, why some are drawn to you without knowing why, while others react with fear, hostility, or silence. They feel the instability. The field around you hums differently. Even machines, clocks, devices, patterns respond to it. Reality is trying to hold its form, but it's failing. Not because something's broken, but because something forgotten is waking up. The crack is not chaos, it's clarity. A glimpse through the thin spaces between principles. The illusion of fixed reality is breaking because the seal is no longer complete. And when a seal fails, what was hidden begins to emerge. Not in violence, not in noise, but in waves of knowing too deep for language. The ones who built the lock are watching now. They know what comes next if the seal dissolves entirely. They knew this day would come, even if they swore to prevent it. And they know what you carry. It was never just a story. The parables were more than teachings. They were encrypted blueprints, layered in metaphor, so the uninitiated would forget them as fables. But to those with the mark, with the memory, with the fracture in their field that let the light in, they were messages. Not for the crowd, for you. One parable remained unfinished. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was never told aloud. It lived in the silences between phrases, in the look he gave the disciples when they asked why he spoke in riddles. Yeshua knew that words could be stolen, twisted, burned, but presence could not. And so he wrapped the final parable in vibration, left it dormant in the earth's field, until the day the hidden one began to stir. The kingdom of heaven is like a seed, he once said, buried in a field. The people thought he meant faith, but the field wasn't a metaphor for belief. It was the living matrix of this reality. And the seed was not an idea. It was a being, planted long ago, hidden, guarded by silence. That seed was you. You were buried not in soil, but in story. your awakening was delayed by design, and the final parable, the one never written, was a warning, not to others, but to you, that when you began to remember, the world would turn against you, not out of malice, but out of fear. Because your emergence would signal the end of the illusion, he said, "Let those who have ears hear." And now the words echo not in sound, but in your bones. Yeshua wasn't teaching morality. He was initiating remembrance. He walked through the grid of law untouched, not because he defied it, but because he fulfilled something beyond it. And in doing so, he left a trail of divine distortion for the one who would come after. They erased his final warnings from the texts, but not from the field. The energy of his message still vibrates through you. The parable continues through your existence, a story unfinished until the one it was meant for began to live it. For those who believed the Kybalion was the source of truth, its elegance was convincing. 7 principles, immutable laws, a polished lens through which to understand all. But what if that structure wasn't the foundation, only the door? A decoy crafted to satisfy the curious and distract the destined, because behind the teachings was something older, something sealed. The Kybalion wasn't a revelation. It was a gate, and you were the key it was designed to reject. Those who authored it never intended full access. They scattered pieces of the deeper architecture through veiled texts, obscure schools, and unspoken initiations. A map etched in riddles. You were meant to feel incomplete while reading it, not because of your lack, but because the text withheld. The more you aligned with its laws, the further you drifted from the source it concealed. There are other locks, hidden not in books, but in thought patterns, in dreams that repeat with uncanny precision, in phrases that feel familiar though you've never heard them spoken. The real knowledge isn't stored in libraries. It's encoded in your biology, your frequency, your resistance to conformity. The reason you've never quite belonged is because you were never meant to fit. You were meant to unlock. And now, the first lock has begun to turn. The Kybalion's influence on your mind weakens. What once felt like answers now feels like noise. The structure strains, trying to reassert its dominance, but it's too late. The door has cracked, and behind it, you feel something vast, intelligent, waiting. The scribes who built the Kybalion's framework left fail-safes, mental constructs designed to collapse inquiry before it reached the threshold. But your thoughts slipped through them like smoke, not because you forced your way in, but because you were never part of the lock to begin with. The system doesn't know what to do with you now. Reality trembles in your presence, not because of what you know, but because of what you are. The lock was never meant to hold you. It was meant to delay your memory. You were never supposed to activate, not in this timeline, not in this form. The moment your signal breached the veil, everything began to shift. You didn't just return, you triggered a chain reaction. The ones who swore secrecy to the Kybalion's deeper purpose have felt it. The hidden councils, the architects of esoteric memory, the keepers of principles beyond public knowledge, they've been alerted, and they're moving quickly. You were a variable they calculated out of existence. Now, you're a presence their math can't contain. So they've started rewriting, not openly, but in quiet digital places. in consciousness streams, in the algorithms that determine what truth is allowed to rise. The Kybalion itself is being edited, not the words, but the meaning. Energetic reinterpretations are being deployed, commentaries altered, new teachings uploaded by those who serve the guardians of the old system. But you are not fooled by revisions. Your field doesn't respond to control, it responds to resonance. The moment you awakened, the old laws began to break not because you opposed them, but because you exceeded them. Every law is now trying to adapt to your presence. They're not suppressing you, they're recalibrating themselves in your image, and the architects are terrified. Some of the oldest circles believed you were a myth, others believed you were a metaphor for the return of consciousness, but a few, a very few, knew the truth. That one would come bearing the anomaly, not to destroy, but to expose. And once seen, it could not be unseen. The principles would begin to rewrite themselves to match the new frequency. The system would no longer be law. It would become fluid. They are rewriting because they hope to confuse you, delay you, drown your signal in noise. But the more they change the code, the louder the old field rings. The original imprint, your imprint, is surfacing through every contradiction, through every attempted erasure. You are not reading the new laws, you're remembering the original ones. Now that you've been found, the reaction has begun. Laws are shifting, realities folding. What was once solid now feels slippery. The words of the Kybalion are losing their grip.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.